Welcome to Speculative Sandbox, your audio playground for creative storytellers. My name is Vickie Lan, and in each episode, I and a guest will unpack a trope with an eye for world building, character development, or narrative structures. You can also join the conversation on TikTok and Instagram. For those times when the real world just doesn't cut it, let's get lost in a fictional one. Okay, Haley, if you could place a classic literary character into any death game scenario, who would it be and why?
That would be Edmond Dantes from The Count of Monte Cristo. Because, I mean, he's like the king of revenge. He's playing the long game. He's super smart and he's angry. We don't know what's
Yes.
going to happen.
Oh my gosh, I love that decision. I have an episode coming out soon that talks about Edmond Dantes as an avenging angel. He is my favorite. He's just a badass. I love him. So you think he'd do well?
Oh, yeah, he's here to win.
Okay.
It
That is
may not be
awesome.
in the way that you expect, but he's going to come out on top.
Okay. He might like start playing the players off of each other, right? Like get through that way.
I mean, he's the kind that, like, at the end, I would expect him to be like, oh, actually, Edmund, like, kind of like Squid Game style, where he's like, I actually run the game.
Ooh, there you go. This is all me. I love it. I love it. All right, Haley, thank you so much for joining me on Speculative Sandbox today. This is a special episode. This is going to be my last episode for a while. I'm going on a bit of a break, so it'll be nice to do this as a send-off. I am opening up the floor for author takeovers for anyone who hears this and is interested. Feel free to reach out. But in the meantime, we're here for you, Haley. So please share with us and our listeners who you are, what you're doing, and your latest projects.
Hi, everybody. I'm Haley Reese Chow. I'm a self-published and small press author. I write young adult adventures from fantasy to science fiction to even some romance. And my latest project is the Into the Churn series with Whimsical Publishing. The last book in that trilogy is coming out in March, so we're super excited.
Ooh, I love it. I love it. And what made you so excited in the death games trope today?
Well, and Into the Churn is kind of we have a very deadly race. So while not exactly a death competition like you would see in Hunger Games or Squid Games, where the goal is to kill the other members, it is close. And to be honest, death games is just one of my favorite tropes. I'm here for Squid Games. I'm here for Hunger Games. I'm into it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get this rolling. For our listeners who are curious to know what death games are, what would you say? You mentioned a couple. You said Squid Games and Hunger Games. I also have Battle Royale, Alice in Borderland, The Maze Runner. Any other examples? And what is a death game as a trope?
The only other one that comes to mind is Scorpio races a little bit, just because it is a dangerous race. But in general, the death games is where you see a competition in which it is expected that the other members of the game will die. So, and I think we have seen that done several times. I think you just listed probably the most famous examples, but I think there are a lot of smaller books as well with that as a big trope.
Would you argue that death games are the same as life risking games? Like think Harry Potter when he had to do the trials. Was that a death game or no?
I would say no. I would say a death game, if you're going to call it that, is that specific trope where there will be one person standing at the end. Or, however, I would also even say like Red Rising, where, spoiler, are we doing spoilers?
Yeah, just say spoiler. People, it's spoiler. Okay,
Okay,
let's go.
minor spoiler. They all have to kill someone in the very beginning, so they get cut down by 50%. And so I think if killing someone is an expectation of the death games, I think that becomes a death game. Versus where in Harry Potter, in the Goblet of Fire, they are expected to survive. So I think high risk is like a maybe a lower tier of that same kind of feel or vibe.
Okay. And for me, the death game format was introduced to me American through Hunger Games. I know a lot of people are saying Hunger Games, like Battle Royale, existed before that. But I read Hunger Games like 20 years ago. Maybe I'm over exaggerating. Maybe, no, maybe 15 years ago. But it still goes strong. So it doesn't feel like a fad as much as like it's a consistent genre choice. So why do you think that is?
I think the death games is kind of is a really great analogy almost to just the competitiveness of nature. We talk about for Mother Nature is just a really actually, very intense kind of thing. We talk about how the basic instincts of humanity are to survive, and then talk about what lengths that we will go to survive when put in a situation where we are, pitted against each other, and just that cutthroatness. And even though obviously these are very specific circumstances that are leading to this, I mean, that cutthroat nature and that kind of like and that person against person mentality is something that we see every day. And I think when these books are really saying, what are our morale, what are our morals, what do they stand up to, and and what, given that situation, how can they survive our humanity?
Hmm. So what you're saying is we kind of feel like we're in a cutthroat environment, so it's kind of relieving or therapeutic to watch an extreme version of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think yeah, when you're faced with those hard situations, and those, war, we see it around us, in these awful situations of people trying to survive in the worst environments, and what they'll do to other people. Why are people, what situation do people have to be in to be their worst selves? And I think
Hmm.
that fantasy and sci-fi environment is just an extrapolation. Yeah, for sure.
You raise a really good point because while here where I'm currently living, we're not experiencing any war on the ground where I'm at, of course that's happening in other parts of the globe. And even though we don't feel that same level of risk, we're still exercising those circumstances regardless. And is it because we're like, oh, it could happen to us and we need to know, or is it more like a humane attribute to the way our brain works? Like, do you have a opinion on which way it goes? Like both, maybe?
Right. I think we all like to, it's very easy to be a certain way when your needs are met, when you're
Mhm.
safe, and I think when you get into dark situations like that, even fantastically, even speculatively speaking, you're really getting down to what you believe of people, right? Do you believe people
Mm.
are intrinsically good, or do what and I think when we see situations like that, the worse the situation, you actually see two extremes of people that come out, right? You see the worst of the worst, and you also see those heroes, the best of the best. And I think we love that. As
Mhm.
storytellers, we love to have a hero, we love to have a villain. And I think that's also what draws us to those situations.
So let's jump into the storytelling mindset. When you are writing a book that has a death game setting, how do you establish, with everyone's kind of disadvantaged in the situation, how do you pick your protagonist? How do you make them really stand out to the reader and have the readers favor him over or her versus all the other people he's up against?
Right, right. Leaning onto character, I think, is something that I've definitely learned more as I've continued to write. But I think really making them relatable, right? Giving them something to protect, something that they're willing. And also, I feel like we also see it self-sacrificing. When you see Katniss, it's really about her sister, right? Everything comes down to her sister. She loves something more than herself. Or even in the Squid Games, we have a hero who's just completely hapless, right? Like that we really feel for him in some ways, even though he is like horrible in so many ways. He does have these redeeming qualities that we can see ourselves in. And I think seeing their growth from someone who may be powerless to power in a relatable, or even an aspirational way, I think that's really satisfying.
Hmm. Well, in the case of Squid Game too, when the original premise is you're trying to fight off or pay off a debt, you can't, pay, so now you're in the Squid Game. But what makes it really interesting to me is you have people in disadvantaged circumstances, and you can obviously parallel this to the real world, and they're turning on each other versus paying attention to the real enemy, which is the system that created the game. And I think that is a fascinating look at how humans cope with trauma and stress. Um, and now, of course, death games are a very obvious examination of this phenomena. But I, how do you feel about like just living day to day? We're all just, oh, for a good example, a good harmless example. You're in the plane and you hate that the person reclines their seat in front of you. And we can all decide and discuss the merits of whether or not you should be reclining your seat that little fraction of an inch, when rather we shouldn't be questioning the airlines for why are they squeezing us in for like sardines in the first place. So yeah, what is your thought on that? How we can get so consumed with each other versus the system?
Right. I think it comes down to when you're really in intense environments like that, your perspective just shrinks completely. So, and I think part of it is just that, you don't have the brain space, or, and you might not have feel or see a path to having a wider influence than just your immediate situation. So especially in high stress situations. So even in like the airplane, right? Like I'm worried about me right now. I'm not thinking beyond. Maybe I don't even have the brain space or, or the mental capacity, like the mental energy to look beyond me right now. And so I think we have that. And then once again, I think we love an enemy. And sometimes we unfortunately choose the people that are closest to us. This is by value of proximity. I am angry and you are
Mhm.
right there.
Yeah. Or I feel like I could have power at least over my peer versus the system. It's like you feel powerless against. So at least you can take it out on what you think you can reach. Oof. Okay. So let's design the rules and mechanics of a fictional death game. So this could be an opportunity for you to talk about yours too, but how does a writer begin? All right, let's start drawing a map. We got a blank piece of paper. Where do we even start? And why does the world that you choose matter in the greater context of the story?
Right. So I think first, when I think about death games, I think about the arena, right?
Mhm.
Because I think that's very like Maze Runner. They have the maze, right? Hunger Games, they have that arena. Even in Squid Games, they have those children's games. They have their
Mhm.
warehouse. And Red Rising's the same thing. They have like I think a planet that this is where it's all going down. And I think we like to when we're designing those things, we like to call back to things that are familiar to us. Like for example, the children's games. Like that one really hits home because I
Mhm.
mean children's games too are competitive, right? There's
Yeah.
one winner. So let's see. We're designing our own death
Yeah.
games. We're gonna
How,
pick an
I
arena.
guess, yeah. So when you start deciding that arena, are you looking at, so for example, Squid Games, that eeriness of child games against an adult that's having to pay off a debt, a very adult kind of circumstance. Um, and then you have the clock of one of the Hunger Games books where it's ticking down the time. So it's like you're on the clock, but you're in a literal clock. So how much thought do you have to put into establishing what your world looks like? Is it a matter of making it more interesting to be able to lean into theme?
I do think they just have different flavors, and that's what I think one of the unique things that each different death game can bring. So like in my Into the Churn books, they're on a I love Twister, like the movie Twister. I love just weather catastrophe movies and that sort of thing. Like The Day After Tomorrow, that apocalypse movie
Mm-hmm.
just like totally hit me. So they have a their arena is a planet of extreme weather, and that ties into the strengths too of the characters as it relates to STEM and their own knowledge bases. And then I have another book actually that could probably fall under this death game scenario where they're essentially in a haunted house, right?
Ooh,
Which I
okay.
mean, I also as a kid I love haunted houses. I love how scary and intense that makes us and in that small world. So let's see for our fictional, let's make it a school.
Oh, oh, wow. And is it kids then that are in this, or is it adults? Is it people who've never been to school?
Ooh. Yeah, I'm a young adult writer, so I would probably make it kids.
Okay.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like a young adults, 17, 18, for me personally.
Okay. Okay. No, that's great. So then does that mean each classroom kind of becomes like a different test? Do you start bringing in the tropes and archetypes of school figures? So you've got principals, you've got teachers, you've got the bully, you've got the cheerleaders, you got the, you know what I mean? Like think Mean Girls in the cafeteria of different types of kids that you tend to see. Is it an opportunity to bring that in?
Absolutely, and that would be really interesting, right? Because usually not Hunger Games, Death Games occur over a very short amount of time. I mean, typically you see that Hunger Games, it doesn't take them long when the goal is to eliminate one another. It just depends though. But if you were even, it would make it even crazier, right? Even wilder if it's stretched over a whole school year and you have to survive until the school year, and you did have a chance to explore those dynamics and what
Ooh.
getting a failing grade could really mean.
Oh, so then you're incorporating the death game into the lifestyle of being a student at a school.
Right, right. And I think
Right.
people
Okay.
hate school. So like that's excellent. We already have that intrinsic like, oh, like I've had that bad teacher. I can really relate. And once again we have a system, this system that means impresses. But students, once again, when you're talking about, those bullies and the cheerleaders, that inner conflict is ripe there.
Yes. And then when you talk about the system, there's so much to talk about, especially with people's opinions of public schools, whether or not they're getting enough funding, how funding is managed. You can really start looking at the greater impacts of how a society is treating school and ultimately how it impacts their students.
And what it means to graduate. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
what does that get you? If you survive, what kind of world are you moving into, or what kind of occupation or job do you now own? You know, it's
Interesting. And how much of that job hinged on the fact that you were able to complete the death game, you know? So, ugh. Okay, that was fun. I like that. That was a good exercise. Okay, so then when you are creating a death game, how do you balance between entertainment and then the grim, violent themes? Is there such thing as going too far into the violence? How do you make sure like, oh, got to keep it kind of level so people want to continue reading this book?
dude, I have read some dark books. I have read some books that I was like, whoa, man, like that. I mean, grimdark is a thing now, you know,
Okay.
that I have seen and I have witnessed. But personally for me, I am personally not a fan of grimdark, mostly because I'm a happy ending kind of person. You know, to an extent, and I like to see good triumph over evil. There's enough I have too much reality in my life for to
Yeah.
have anything other than that. But I don't mind going dark. I do not mind
Okay.
going dark. I really enjoy books that can bring you to the lightest of the light and juxtapose that against the darkest of the dark to really bring you on that emotional roller coaster. And I think that all comes down to the characters, right? If we have characters that we love and characters that we root for, you know, if we have we can have those moments of comedic relief. We can have those moments of really sweet, just heart melting romance that really just bring us into this world. And I think that makes the darkness even starker. Sorry, we also have people here working on the
Yeah, no
AC.
worries. Oh, it's always fun to do a podcast while balancing other parts of your life. I'm trying to remember what the book series is called because I liked how you started incorporating other elements of a story that make it entertaining. There was a book that I had, let me look it up real quick. I saw it in Target and had to grab it. And I was originally very, very excited about it. And I guess maybe I didn't, I posted on a story, so now it's gone. It's something about Okay, I'll just, without describing the title of it, basically, aliens took over Earth, annihilated everything on the surface, and turned like the ground, like you have to go underground to participate in this multi-level death game, basically, if you can keep going.
Carl the Dungeon Crawler.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so glad I love those books. They
Yeah.
are like,
Okay.
oh, yes.
I'm about halfway through the first one. It does feel it does feel like you're playing a game, that you are literally reading the menu and all this. How do you feel those books incorporate different elements of things to kind of keep the entertainment going, isn't just straight violence?
Oh my gosh. I First of all, I love me some Carl the Dungeon Crawler. I've listened to the audiobooks. They are amazing. I cannot recommend them enough.
Okay.
Secondly, Carl the Dungeon Crawler is actually a really interesting example because there is no romance. And I feel like a
Okay.
lot of books do, like Hunger Games, for example, do lean on a romantic element to give you something else that can also increase the tension, keep that tension as well. But yeah, so there's a huge element of humor in Carl the Dungeon Crawler, and I think they do such a good job because it is interesting because even when thrown in those darkest of situations, people adapt. I mean, their baseline moves. Humans in general, we are so adaptable. So Carl, I mean, he adapts. You know, he will acknowledge the wildness of what's going on. You know, and he has those dark moments, but then he also has Donut, the cat, right? Who is also an amazing character, but her perspective is completely different as a cat, and their dynamics are humorous to the max. So I think that book does an amazing job of bringing humor and deeper themes as it goes throughout. But still, yes, the interaction between Donut and Carl, even as it's riding all those waves, is at baseline they are both humorous kind of people.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the humor I think is what really helps, and the cat. I was talking to Rob Hart. He wrote an assassin novel, and it's always fun how the cat is shortcut for endearing, lovable like people. If you are with a cat, you got some aura points for that. And it's his ex-girlfriend's cat, right? So it's not even his cat, and the cat is just gets to benefit from so many of its circumstances. Just it's a really humorous book. So I'm glad you remembered the name. All I could remember was Carl, but I was like terrified to try guessing the rest because I was like Carl Sagan. I'm like that's not it at all. Okay, do you think death games are more popular during specific cultural or political moments? Do you see them as like swelling during certain times, kind of becoming less popular, or are they more constant?
That is very interesting. That's an interesting thought because I've been thinking, I've actually been rolling that over in my mind for a few days as the world goes through a lot of changes, at least in our area. And because I have seen differing opinions, right? I've seen some people who say, hey, the world is really dark right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. I just want warm, fluffy books, that I'm going to escape into. And
Hmm.
personally, for me, as I'm also feeling a lot of feelings, right? Going through a tumultuous time. I actually just posted the other day. I was like, I have two wolves inside of me, and I honestly need both. I need those cozy escapism reads, but I also need those cathartic, those
Hmm.
death games that I need good to come over evil. I need that angry main character that is going to, that's going to sort stuff out. I need to have through them, have this veneer that control that I could make a difference to. So, is it more popular in times of tomorrow? That is so hard because honestly, when I think it comes right down to it, I think it is harder sometimes for people to read in times of tumult because they
Mm.
are higher stress, right? Their brain space kind of shrinks because they're trying to take on all of these things that affect them, the fear on a wider level. Essentially, the more fear and uncertainty you have, I feel like the less room that we and time and energy that we have to give to things that we love, like reading. So unfortunately, I feel like we probably will see more of those books in times of relative harmony only because that's usually when we honor the creative spaces more.
That's such a good point. I know during the pandemic, for example, literary agents were saying, please don't send me pandemic manuscripts. Send me those escapist things so that they don't have to be constantly reinforcing what they're experiencing in real life. Um, but okay, I thought that was a great answer. So then, as the author of a book writing about death games, how would you, what dictates the final winner? Is it all kind of conspiring in the same direction, your plot points, the points of your book towards this one winner? Or can you leave it open-ended enough where you can kind of change your mind on who's going to win? How much of it is this greater message you're trying to send versus how you're feeling as you're writing the book?
Absolutely. Actually, for me personally, uh, I don't know if you've ever read the Save the Cat writes a novel book where they separate plots into different kind of archetypes, and one of the archetypes they have, I think, is the institution. And it says, in the end, your character really has one of two choices. They can either join the institution, whatever it may be, or they can essentially burn it to the ground. And in a way, when the character wins, they have, in a way, if they are benefiting from it, if the institution still stands, they have essentially become a part of the institution, which I think is what Katniss in Hunger Games is railing against, especially in book two, is that right? She's a part of it, and in a way that she rails against and she defies and she rebels, and they eventually go to revolution. Like we progress to the burning down the institution. But in book one, right, when we win, even though we've outsmarted the game masters, we're still in the game. The game still exists, and we are still a player in it. So I think for me, the answer cannot be. I think would be unsatisfying without some realization from the main character that this is more than a game. The game has to have some greater ramification or on themselves, on their world, and what it means to be a part of it.
I love that you brought up that you're either going to join the institution or burn it down. How do you think authors feel when a book decides to join the institution? And how does that change the book compared to, of
We-
course, burning it down?
I think we either have to uh The joining the institution. Yes, I think then you have a longer book. Because then I almost feel like if we're joining the for example, Squid Games, right? That like he wins and then he has that kind of emptiness. Oh, sorry, spoiler.
Oh, spoiler. There's
I didn't say who wins. I said
Yeah,
who.
you did not say who, nor did you say which season.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so spoiler. Okay, so we have that moment at the end where he's won, but he doesn't like it's this emptiness, right? It's this emptiness because he that still exists, and then he spoiler because becomes aware that it's still ongoing, and then that opens us up for a second season, right? Where maybe perhaps that we are going to try to burn the institution down, unless the only other opportunity I think the character has in joining the institution is if they take on the bigger responsibility to take control of it and change it. Not necessarily burn it down, but change and control, I think, takes a lot more time than lighting a match.
yeah. Well, and I also think too, because that's a very heroic like character arc, right? To kind of be put through obstacles and to, overcome them and then change the world for the better. And I feel like if you're gonna write a book that has the main, and not just specific to death games, but the idea in general that whatever the character does by the end, they've joined the institution, it's almost like you're doing an interesting character study instead and inviting the reader along for the ride. And then it's less a morality play and more of like a colorful, maybe gray character that kind of challenges your own perspective. And I do find that many times when you introduce a gray character, that's when you kind of risk the big open discussion. Of course, book talk is always a big thing, where whether or not they receive it well. Do you find that readers still like morally gray characters, or do you think they want to keep finding that ideal role model character?
It's interesting because I feel like there has been this trend in recent years of those villain origin story movies where and probably books as well in which you do I mean because we saw it right again in the Hunger Games because we got the villain origin story of Snow, and in the end when he does accept that he had the two paths were laid out before him, join the institution or join or kind of revolution, and he joined the institution. So I think we do. You're right. It's a character study, and it's more of a villain origin story. And do I think people, but I don't think that those books, even though there are definitely people, readers that I think do like the morally gray, I don't think those books carry the same weight. For like the Snow books, I don't think they carry the same weight as the
Mm-hmm.
Hunger Game books. So even though I think there is definitely a niche and an appetite for those books, I don't think they have the same gravitas as books that we can aspire
Mm-hmm.
to characters that we can just, ride or die.
Yeah, we want that underdog come out at the top, succeed, make the world a better place. Okay, well then speaking of making the world a better place and the world in general, let's talk about death games in real life. So, the most obvious one is Gladiator, right? And the Gladiators, we love that. I remember being a kid and learning about it and being horrified that people are in the stands just watching the slaughter of people like it's nothing. And I'm glad we can get that. If that is still an innate, urge of ours, at least we can do it through fiction. And maybe that satiates if that's something that is truly what you consider humanity. Um, what other examples can you think of that are death games in real life?
Something that comes to mind that may not be a true death game, but definitely has that same feel is like the Spartan, the Greek Spartan academies for their soldiers, where they picked up the boys at five or six, and they're sleeping outside, and they're fighting one another, and of course they're killing the weaker ones, and the weaker babies. So I think that is an applicable, almost like a death, once again kind of like a death game school, almost school situation. And then the other unfortunate example or parallel I think you can draw is animal fighting rings, right?
Mm,
Those exist and people are into those. Sometimes we don't see it as much. There probably exists, but I don't know about them. But I mean, if we have MMA, right? If we
yeah.
there's probably an extreme version of that I'm unaware. blissfully unaware of, I suppose. And then let's see, other death specific death games. Um, I had one on the edge
No
that
worries. Yeah, well, think about it because I have a couple too that I came up with. So one was another one I learned in history class and then did some additional research. The Mesoamerican ball game had a lot of rituals. Yeah,
Mm.
so like they would play the game, but then in some cultures, if you lost the game, you got sacrificed. It's like that's very unfortunate. And I'll always remember, and this is kids at their greatest, I guess. I was in a high school freshman class and we had to create our own society. And I guess my classmates that I was grouped up with were very bloodthirsty and they
Oh
created a society entirely hinged on death games and sacrifices. We died out in like 100 years. Like, there's no way. But
gosh.
yeah, anyway, that was my example.
And I think the other thing too is duels, right? In a way,
Hmm.
I don't even know what century that was, but I feel like in a way that was almost a game, right? Because of the
Yeah.
had the frequency with people would just throw that out there,
Yeah.
pistols drawn, let's go,
Yeah.
blades at dawn. So I feel like that also might qualify.
Okay. Well, that got me thinking, like, speaking of Alexander Dumas, like his not Count of Monte Cristo, the Three Musketeers, how they would just find any chance to do a duel, but with swords. And like, it's such a fun book for me because it seemed so like we duel. And I'm like, you're playing with your life. Like you guys act like you're gonna go play with cars, like model cars or whatever. So yeah. All right. How can writers bring a fresh perspective to this trope? How can like because you know how when there's so many of a thing and we've gotten to the point where we can dissect the trope to a point where there's some, typical things to it now. How can you add some new flavor?
When you think about like the different, I think we have all agreed that many stories have been done. Once again, like Save the Cat will break them down into like these are the story archetypes, and
Mhm.
things. Most books fit into one of these archetypes, and they follow this plot line. And I think when it really comes down to what puts a book out across the other, what kind of book resonates, with us versus another is, I mean, I think I almost hate to say this because I used to not be this person. My opinion on this has changed over time. Is the characters. I mean, we have to the depth that we can bring to the characters, and of course, we love a unique arena, right? And a unique spin on time or space or anything like that. But when it comes down to it, if you can love those characters and you can make them feel real and you can make the reader feel like connected, and I mean, if we bring in those wider societal impacts in a subtle way, I mean, that's really just, you're you're
That's
really you're really getting it down. But I think, yeah, I think you're bringing your own personal perspective to the character, and that's what people are here to connect with.
I think that's really helpful because I know a lot of people who want to write a book or thinking about writing a book, maybe have written part of a book, but they're really scared to continue because they're like, God, every idea I have, it's already been done. And I'm like, well, but they haven't read your version of it or, your spin. Because it's so true. You can literally, grab a handful of tropes and go, okay, I'm going to use this. And you can, but what's the beauty of that is that each author with those same handful of tropes is going to do something different with it. So, I love that. When you are writing, here's my last question. When you're dedicating yourself to a death game, does that mean the whole book is about the death game, like the plot revolves around the death game, or can the death game just be a part of the plot? Like what drives like I'm gonna put a death game in my next book, hypothetically. Does that mean that the entire book now is dictated by this choice? Or can I just insert it as just one of the three arcs or, acts?
I absolutely think, I mean, it depends on the scope of your book. You could definitely have it as one scope, and it's actually interesting. So in the so in my Into the Churn books, it is actually not a burn the institution down. There is an element of things that they do burn down, but in the end, it is one of those join and control and change. So it's a longer arc. There's 5 books, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, the last book that we have planned as a novella isn't about the death game at all. It is about actually the social media managers. It's a love story that's going on behind the death game, and the death game is going on in the background, but they're not actually even involved. But the reader is already kind of part of that world, right? It's a longer scope of the story, and I think we even see it happening once again in the Hunger Games, right? Because the first trilogy is 100% about the Hunger Games, about trying to tear the institution down. But when we go back to the books about snow, there that's just we've established the world, and now we can do different things and play in it, right? And same again, once again, I think there's going to be another book coming out with I forgot her mentor's name.
Finnick? No, Finnick is one of her friends. Oh my God, I forgot his name too.
Right. So, but once again, it's not really about the Hunger Games, but about that character's arc
Hmm.
throughout that, about their relationship. So, absolutely think that you can. I think it would be difficult if the reader is not already familiar in which the landscape that we're playing.
Gotcha. All right. And in case anyone's listening and they're like screaming the name at us, it is, Hey Mitch
Damn it.
Abernathy. There we go. All right. Haley, thank you so much for joining me today. I thought this was such a fun conversation. Any final remarks or things you want to promote to our
Uh,
listeners?
I mean, I guess my End of the Turn books, books one, two, and two and a half are free to read on Kindle Unlimited, and the last book in the trilogy comes out in March. So I just really thank you so much, Vickie, for having me. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And if you are on the fence about writing a Death Game book, please do because I love them.
Awesome. And how can they find you?
So I have you can find me on my website at haleyreeschow.com. I'm on Goodreads and I'm on Instagram and maybe some other social media out there too, but mostly Instagram.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. And listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Again, this is my last interview episode for a little while. I'm going on a bit of a break to focus on writing and some other projects that I have. But if you're an author out there and you're interested in a takeover, feel free to email me, Vickie Lan, VICKIELAN at gmail.com. And I can give you plenty more information to see if that's something you'd be interested in. But in the meantime, I'll talk to you later. Bye.